A very good morning to all of you. We've been talking about structuralism and post-structuralism. Let's try to cover this topic very quickly. Uh, we try to understand the origin of French structuralism. Then we refer to Saussurean structuralism, in which we understood the binary oppositions stated by Ferdinand de Saussure. We understood what is signifier, signified, lang, and parole. And we also understood the difference between synchronic and diachronic linguistics, the difference between infrastructure and superstructure. And further, we try to understand how social scientific theories emphasize on structures, how they see structures. For example, we refer to Louis Althusser's reading of Marx, and we refer to Lacan's reconstruction of Sigmund Freud. Okay, we understood how they try to understand structuralism and at the same time how they apply this linguistic theory in the study of social sciences. Besides, they oppose the so-called what you not so-called I'm sorry they oppose the subjectivity and consciousness of existentialism, and they talk about the death of the subject. Okay, and that can be seen in their theory. Now let's go ahead with Claude Lévi-Strauss. Claude Lévi-Strauss, who was the French anthropologist. He just okay. So Lévi-Strauss was the French anthropologist. When we talk about his structural analysis, he did it in the context of myths, mythology. So he tried to understand myths by using structural theory. So he went for the structural analysis of myths. So he suggests that we interpret myths as per rule. Myths, whatever myths are there, they are the instances of per rule, means manifestation of the underlying knowledge or underlying system. Okay, manifestation of the theory, we can say. So myths are per rule, or speech acts, they can be considered as speech acts that are not the articulation of any particular conscious subject. There is no subjectivity in it, but they are expressions and variations of a few basic structural relations, okay, that form a culture's lang. So, according to him, myths are kind of parole or speech acts. Okay, they are not subjective, they are not conscious subject as such. They are rather structural relations, the manifestation of or expression of structural relations, and these structural relations form a culture's lang, a culture system. Okay, uh, lang is what we have already understood. What is lang? The set of interpersonal rules, the set of underlying system and norms that operate unconsciously. Okay, within that operate. I gave you the example from linguistics. At present, I'm talking in English. This is the parole. This is the actual speech act, expression and variation of structural relations in English, which form English as a lang. So the structure of English is lang and its actual use is parole. So similarly, myths are paroles, okay, and they form the culture's myth, lang system, rules and norms. And these rules and norms, lang, operate consciously, unconsciously, and they are the actors in a culture. The culture means actors means the people of the part of the culture must obey if at all you want to function. Okay, the people use these rules and norms unconsciously. They are aware of these rules unconsciously, although they don't know that they know it. Okay, the way the people who have never studied any rules of language, they follow the rules of language unconsciously. So he just does the structural analysis of the raw and crooked, which is the English title of the French work of 1964. Okay, it is the English title of the French work, 1964. So the French title was Le Cru et le Cute, the raw and the crooked. Okay, so in this particular work, Levi Strauss analyzes 187 separate myths, and he shows them all to be variations, transformations, reversals, inversions, okay, and so on, of a deep structural opposition between the raw and the crooked. Okay, so this is at the superstructural level of the myth, the expression of the underlying infrastructural opposition of nature and culture. We'll talk about it. So what am I trying to suggest here is that myths, you know, are analyzed by Levi Strauss, 187 separate myths. And through this analysis, he shows the variations, transformations, reversals. The transformation means changing nature, variation means the differences, okay, or opposite things. We can say inversions. You might be knowing inversions in language, in sentence structure. For example, the regular structure is SVO, subject, verb, object. And when you go for O, VES, etc., that is a kind of inversion. In the language of poetry, you come across such kind of inversion. For example, the rain came down is the regular structure. But when you say down came the rain, and yes means subject. So this is an instance of inversion. In many of myths, we come across such kind of inversions, inversions of rules. So these myths, show kind of deep structural opposition between the raw and the crooked. He uses the title, the raw, and the rules which are not straightforward as such. So this itself is the kind of raw and crooked is the title of this particular work, and this shows at the superstructural level of myth the expression of the underlying infrastructural opposition of nature and culture. So yesterday we referred to infrastructure and superstructure. We understood that our understanding of family, whatever family ideology, social ideology, cultural ideology, religious ideology we see, that is a kind of superstructure, but it comes from the infrastructure. Okay, so similarly, myths are the expression of the underlying infrastructural opposition of nature and culture. Infrastructural here stands for what? The deep structure, the structure which is not seen on surface. Okay, so it is the underlying structure. So this is how Claude Lévi-Strauss tries to understand the analysis or the myths and their nature, their functioning. So let's come to the concluding part of our discussion on structuralism. Of course, we are going to talk about post-structuralism separately. Okay, so what happens here that we need to understand? So structuralism gives a kind of methodological privilege of structures, we can say. So this methodological privileging of structure means, privilege means what? Giving prominence to structure, the underlying rules or general rules or event. This prominence privilege is given over the event, over the performance, over the actual speech act. Okay, so the act of articulating the myth leads structuralism to place emphasis on synchronic relations rather than on diachronic developments. Now, you need to be very much familiar with Sassurian binary opposition to understand all these terms in a better manner. Now, what we try to understand here is that, Claude Lévi-Strauss, in studying myths by using structuralist method, he gives emphasis to the underlying structure. By doing so, what these structuralists are doing, they are giving emphasis on synchronic relations. Synchronic means the study of language or the study of that particular aspect, maybe myths or any other science, at a given time. They don't talk about the historical developments. So this is one thing that we understood. Secondly, the structuralists are thus concerned with studying particular systems or structures under somewhat artificial and ahistorical conditions. Means they don't take history into consideration. They don't take what we call the natural things as such into consideration. They study all these things in artificial and ahistorical conditions. Now, what is the aim? They do it in the hope of explaining their present functioning, how they function. So parole is important, and they show how this is manifested, how the underlying system is manifested through the study of parole. So we can see it in Althusser's concentration on the various ideological state apparatus at a given time in a society, means synchronic, rather than the historical evolution of these various cultural formations. It does not focus on the historical or diachronic developments. Same in the case of Barthes. Barthes' emphasis on writing, that is, a creature, it is the French word for writing, as a function that exceeds the author's desire to express or communicate. Okay, and he associates it with style. So this is how we understand structuralism. In the next part of my discussion, I shall be talking about post-structuralism.